This is the story of a little boy, a song, and a journey. The little boy is me, or rather, was me, a long time ago, back when I was a kid growing up in Brooklyn, New York. The song is a lullaby, a simple but evocative song about nighttime out on the range in the Old West. The journey was the one that I took in my search to find this song, this iconic memory of my youth, to see if it actually existed somewhere in the world outside of the place that it held in my memory. The memory of when I was young, and it was nighttime, and my mom would sing the song to me to help me get to sleep. What started out as a simple memory and a question became an outright odyssey which took me from my home in Eugene, Oregon, out along the trails of the information superhighway to strange and interesting places. From an internet discussion forum about folk music to the discovery of a fascinating cowboy poet in South Dakota at the turn of the last century. From the archives of a college in Southern California to a phone call with a wonderful octogenarian singer in Arizona who had both researched and recorded a version of the song. Along the way, I collected a number of books, old magazines, and vintage vinyl albums, all with information on, or recordings of, different versions of this elusive song. I found that it was created and performed by a diverse collection of artists, from a famous fellow named Bing to other not-so-famous people with names like Estelle, Clifton, Frank, and Katie, who may not have been well known themselves, but who definitely knew a good song when they heard it. I also found a new appreciation for a few things. For cowboy poetry, for the art of taking a poem and setting it to music in a way that is not only doing justice to the original, but adds something more to its expression. And not least of all, an appreciation for how a song can hold a particularly special place in people's memories and in their hearts. Finally, I found that the journey that I thought was taking me out to other places often took some unexpected turns, and I found myself backtracking through very familiar territory, some as close as my own backyard. So here is the story of my song odyssey. The Boy. My song odyssey begins in the city. The big city. New York City, that is, in the borough of Brooklyn. I was born in New York Hospital in February of 1963, and I spent my first 10 years growing up in an apartment building on the corner of St. Mark's and Brooklyn Avenues in Brooklyn. Ours was a top-floor apartment on the northeast corner of the building. We had big windows with great views on both sides of the corner. Out of the windows to the north, I could see the traffic coming towards our house on Brooklyn Avenue. Beyond that, the elevated Long Island Railroad tracks over on Atlantic Avenue, and further still, a great view of the Manhattan skyline in the distance beyond. Looking out the windows to the east, I could oversee what was to become my primary domain as I grew up: Brower Park and the Brooklyn Children's Museum. From my earliest days, I spent a lot of time in that park, whether it was as a baby in my stroller when my mom took me for walks, or when we were the audience while my dad played chess with the other guys out on the chess tables along the north side of the park. Or later, when I was older, spending my summer days with my pals playing baseball on the concrete baseball diamond, or even just in the empty lot playing the old standard, Cowboys and Indians. I was a happy kid, a bit on the energetic side, and I'm sure that I was a handful for my mom. If I wasn't bouncing up and down and up and down and up and down again on my parents' bed, I was probably finding some reason to run full tilt from one end of our apartment to the other, all the way down the long hallway that ran from our front door at one end to my parents' room at the far end. And at the end of one of my typical energetic days, you would find me being tucked into bed by my mom, and then she would sing me to sleep. Mom had a regular repertoire of 10 to 15 songs that she would sing as lullabies, a rotating selection of 5 or 6 songs any given evening. These songs ranged from classic American folk songs to Negro spirituals to traditional Norwegian melodies. And then there was this one song, the song that this story is about. The Song, Part 1. Now I know that I said that the story begins in the city, but to tell the truth, this story really begins not in a particular place, but with a song. A song which was around long before that little boy came along. A song that was written a long way from New York City. It's a lullaby, a cowboy lullaby in fact, that weaves a simple story about night on the prairie and a cowboy calming the restless cattle with a song. Desert silvery blue beneath the pale moonlight, coyotes yapping lazy on the hill, sleepy winks of light along the far skyline, time for mill and cattle to be still. Now to me, this wasn't just any song. It was my favorite song. Not quite like the songs on the radio by the Beatles or the Jackson 5. This was a personal song, a song that I would eventually hear thousands of times over the years, as my mom would sing it to me just about every night. I heard this song so often and loved it so much that it became ingrained in me. So much so that even after I grew too old for lullabies, I could still hear its echoes in my mind at bedtime as I drifted off to sleep. As a boy, lying there in my bed in our apartment in Brooklyn, this song brought to my mind's eye images of what it would be like at night out on the prairie with the cattle lowing and the cry of the coyotes in the distance. These were all things that were about as foreign to my New York City experience as the surface of the moon, although I had seen close-ups of the moon through a telescope by the time I was 5. As the song continued, it filled in more of the picture of this prairie night. So now the lightning's far away, the coyote's nothing skeery, just singing to his dearie. So now, tamala holiday, so settle down, ye cattle, till the morning. Now I grew up knowing the song's name as the first 3 words of the first line, Desert Silv'ry Blue. It never occurred to me that it had any other name. So a few years ago, when I got the idea of trying to find a copy of some sheet music or a recording of it, I was disappointed when I couldn't find any reference to the song, either in songbooks or on CD. I searched all over, using a few different variations and combinations of words in the song, but found nothing. Pretty soon, I just gave up and forgot about it for a while. Then, a few years later, I was humming the song to myself one day, and on a whim, I decided to try and search for it again. I opened up the internet search engine Google and started searching on all of the names that I could think of based on the words of the song. And then, lo and behold, this time I found something. There, on my computer screen, in the search results, was a part of the song. I clicked on the link and found myself at a website called the Mudcat Cafe. It turns out that Mudcat is an organization that maintains the Digital Tradition Folk Song Database, a database of thousands of folk songs and their history. The forum area of the website was where people discussed folk music and often asked for help identifying songs that they had heard. There, right in front of me, was a message asking people if they knew a song called Desert Silv'ry Blue. What followed was a thread of messages from people who recognized the song, talking about how they learned it with different lyrics or maybe to a different tune.
Hi all, this is a Badger Clark song/poem. I think it may also go under the title, A Roundup Lullaby. Anybody got a full set of words and or information on it? Thanks. Ray.
Thank you. I went to summer camp for 10 years in a row, and this was my favorite song. I still sing it to the stars and friends when they are upset and having trouble going to sleep. This song has a very special place in my heart, and I'm glad to find it here online. Thanks again, Mary. I learned it at a Girl Scout camp, and I'm pretty sure it was in one of my old American Camping Association songbooks from the late 60s, the one that fits in your back pocket. My boys all loved this as a nightly lullaby, and still do on occasion. One of my favorites. We do a lot of elder hostel programs, and sometimes get pretty garbled requests for this. If they ask for a song we sang at camp, something about the blue and silver desert and the coyotes, this is usually it. Don't know about the melody. I learned it from Katie Lee. She always told me to sing the whole thing. So I do.
Eureka! I now knew the name of the person who actually wrote the song, Badger Clark, and that gave me a direction to head in toward the next stop on my journey. The Poet. Finally, I had some information to start researching. As my journey continued, I began to look for information on this fellow Badger Clark, and here is what I found. Charles Badger Clark, Jr. was a poet, lecturer, and traveler. Clark was born on the first day of 1883, January 1st, in Albia, Iowa. When he was 3 months old, his family moved to Dakota Territory, where his father, Charles B. Clark, Sr., served as a Methodist preacher in a number of towns, most notably the infamous town of Deadwood, where he knew, and eventually presided over the funeral of, Calamity Jane in 1903. In 1902, the younger Clark graduated from Deadwood High School and enrolled the following year at Wesleyan. After only 1 year there, Clark sought adventure outside of South Dakota. He traveled to Cuba to join a colonizing effort after the Spanish-American War. After 2 years in Cuba, he returned to South Dakota. At some point around this time, he contracted tuberculosis. In an effort to improve his health, Clark moved to Arizona, where he managed a small ranch near the Mexican border. The dry air worked immediate improvement on Badger's health, and he proceeded to fall deeply and passionately in love with ranching, cowpunching, and what he called the last of the old open range. Badger spent 4 years working as a ranch hand on a ranch near Tombstone, Arizona. It was here that he began writing poems about working on the ranch and the cowboy life. Badger felt that he had stumbled unexpectedly into paradise. The sky was persistently blue, the sunlight was richly golden, the folds of the barren mountains and the wide reaches of the range were full of many lovely colors, and his nearest neighbor was 8 miles away. The cowman who dropped in for a meal now and then appeared to have ridden directly out of books of adventure, with old, young faces full of bad grammar, strange oaths, and stranger yarns, and hearts for the most part as open and shadowless as the country that they daily ranged. Clark wrote his stepmother regularly and, quote, found prose too weak to express his utter content and perpetrated his first verses, unquote. His stepmother thought the poems so good that they should be published, and submitted a number of his poems to the magazine Pacific Monthly, and shortly after his first poem was accepted, Badger became a regular contributor. Badger Clark was one of the first writers to become known for writing what came to be known as cowboy poetry. He painted word pictures of cowboys at work, praising Western values and singing of the beauty of both the wide open spaces of Arizona and the Black Hills of the Dakotas. When Badger's father's ill health drew him back to South Dakota, his ranching days were over, but the flavor of camp smoke and the bawling of the cattle colored his poetry for the rest of his life, and he never did capitulate to the walled-in lifestyle that he so feared. His first book of poems, called Sun and Saddle Leather, was published in 1915. In it were a number of poems that became very well known, including A Cowboy's Prayer, The Lost Pardoner, A Border Affair, which later became the song Spanish is the Loving Tongue, and one little poem called A Roundup Lullaby, which, after being made into a song, would capture the imagination of that little boy in a large city far to the east some 50 years later. Now, even though I had found the source of this song, I was fascinated by the person who wrote the words. I found out more about what happened to Mr. Badger Clark. While Badger Clark wrote a few more volumes of poetry, It soon became apparent that the slim output of poetry written between frequent hiking trips and horseback riding was not going to support even his modest needs. Necessity forced Badger to accept speaking engagements, which brought to light his natural speaking style and sharp wit. Although dangerously close to a, quote, real job, unquote, his speaking tours were extremely popular and Badger found himself enjoying the diversion. He became a much sought-after lecturer, and he made friends throughout the state and even made a few cross-country tours before the lure of the Black Hills became too strong to resist. Already a well-known and well-liked character, in 1925 Badger received permission to build a cabin on state-owned land in Custer State Park. The game preserve was a natural for this early conservationist. He named his cabin the Badger Hole. Although a lifelong bachelor, Badger Clark was a very social animal, and the four-room cabin with a front porch stretching the entire width of the building was expressly designed for entertaining. And as he had hoped, a steady stream of friends and admirers made the long trek into the wilderness to listen to his adventures in Cuba or tales of his life on the disappearing range. Though the cabin was large for one person, space was its only luxury. The living room was heated by a stone fireplace, the kitchen by a wood cook stove, and the bedrooms not at all. There was no running water, and kerosene lamps lit Badger's typewriter. In 1939, the governor of South Dakota named Badger Clark the first poet laureate for the state, but jokingly called him the poet laureate in honor of his most common subject matter, and he held that title until his death in 1957. The Badger Hole became Badger's first permanent home and remains today a South Dakota historic landmark, and stands just as he left it for his final trip to the hospital in September of 1957. While Badger Clark was a fascinating character, I was to find he was not the only fascinating person involved in the creation of the song that I loved. The music. I had found the source poem. I now needed to find where the music came from. I started searching for references to the sheet music, and soon found out that A Roundup Lullaby has been set to several tunes. In fact, some 6 musical settings of the poem by different composers had appeared by 1952. The earliest song version I could find was from 1919, with music by Estelle Fileo. Estelle was a composer who focused on setting Western poetry to music. I obtained a copy of the sheet music of her version of Roundup Lullaby, and initially I thought I had found exactly what I was looking for. But once I looked at the score more closely and plunked it out on the piano, I realized that while the words were right, this wasn't the same tune that I was familiar with. The next version I came across was from 1922, with music by Gertrude Ross, but I soon found out that this too was not the right melody. I did, however, find that this version had a following of its own, due in no small part to its showing up in a 1936 movie called Rhythm on the Range, starring Bing Crosby and Frances Farmer. In the movie, rather than a cowhand out on the range singing to a herd of cattle, Bing sings it to one lone cow in a train as they head out west.
Desert blue and silver, the pale moonshine, coyotes yapping lazy on the hill, sleepy winks of lightning down the far skyline, time for milling cattle to be still. So now the lightning's far away, that coyote's nothing scary, just a singing to his dearie. Tamalani day, settle down, you cattle, till the morning. There's nothing out the hazy range that you folks need, nothing we can see to take your eye. Yet we gotta watch you where you'd all stampede, lunging down some royal bank to die. So now, for still the shadows stay, the moon is slow and steady, the sun comes when he's ready. No use running out to meet the morning.
Oh, say.
Do you mind if I sit here?
Oh, go right ahead. That's Penny Ryland's bunk. You better use it and grab yourself some shut-eye. You'll be needing it before long.
Always seeing way off dreams of silver blue, always feeling thorns that stab and sting, yet stampeding never made a dream come true. So I ride around myself and sing. So now the lightning's far away, the coyote's nothing scary, he's just singing to his dearie. Settle down, you cattle, till the morning. So
I finally came across a reference to a version that might be the one. I discovered that Pomona College in California had a glee club that had a long tradition of singing a version of Roundup Lullaby, with music by an alumni of Pomona and the arrangement by a much-loved professor of music at the college. As I dug further, I was able to find out more details of how the poem moved from the Southwest out to California and picked up a tune along the way. The Cowhand. Clifton W. Barnes was a graduate of the Pomona College class of 1913. After finishing college, Mr. Barnes spent some time running cattle in the Southwest desert. Like Badger Clark, Cliff found work on a cattle ranch near the Mexican border. He often had to do a good deal of solitary riding, sometimes packing for extended periods without seeing another soul. He would take his guitar as his constant companion on these trips. He had come across Badger Clark's Western verse, and, sitting before a lonely campfire out on a lonelier cattle range, with only a guitar and a horse for company, he improvised tunes of his own to fit 5 of his favorite poems, working them over and over again, in the saddle and around the fire, until they satisfied him. This is apparently how my version of Roundup Lullaby came into being. After he returned to Pomona, California, Cliff sang the songs to his friend Carl Thomason, who was at the time a member of the Pomona College Men's Glee Club. Thomason, in turn, sang the songs for the director of the Glee Club, Professor Ralph Lyman. Prof. Lyman took one of those songs and turned it into a staple of the Glee Club, where its fame began to spread. The Prof. Ralph H. Lyman was a professor of music at Pomona College for many years. Prior to coming to Pomona College, Lyman was the director of the School of Music at the University of Oregon in Eugene, just a mile or so away from my current home. In 1917, he left his position at the U of O to become the chair of the music department at Pomona College. In addition to being the chair of the music department at Pomona, Prof, as he was affectionately known, was also the director of Pomona's glee clubs and choir. Most professors are called Prof occasionally by their students, but in the case of Ralph Lyman, Prof became a permanent nickname. For students working closely with him, Mr. Lyman would have been too formal, and somehow Ralph would have been entirely too flippant. Prof was just right. It was respectful and affectionate and familiar, but not too familiar. Over the years, he came to be known to thousands of Pomona students by this name. If you said, "I was talking to Prof," everybody at Pomona would know you meant Professor Ralph H. Lyman. After hearing Carl Thomason sing Clifton Barnes' song version of A Roundup Lullaby, Prof. Lyman asked Cliff Barnes' permission to adapt it for use by the Glee Club. Mr. Barnes kindly granted permission, and Prof arranged the song for men's voices and had it published. The song became a staple of the Pomona College Glee Club. The first confirmed record I have of the Glee Club performing the song is from an April 1927 concert announcement in the San Mateo Times. Roundup Lullaby was also part of the club's repertoire a few years later when it won the 1932 National Glee Club Championship, beating out the odds-on favorite, the Yale Glee Club, and has remained a part of their repertoire for over 80 years. The Ralph H. Lyman Hall on the Pomona College campus is an auditorium with seating for 250 and honors the memory of the much-loved professor who was the chair of the music department from 1917 to 1948.
Desert blue and silver in the still moonshine, coyote yapping lazy on the hill, sleepy winks of lightning down the far skyline, time for mill and cattle to be still. Far away, the coyote's nothing scary. He's singing through his dairy. Ee-yaw, Tom of holiday, settle down, you cattle, till the of silver blue, always feeling thorns that stab and sting. Yes, and feeling never made a dream come true. So I ride around myself and sing. Far away, the coyote's nothing scary. He's singing to his dearie. Ee-yaw, Tom of holiday, settle down, you cattle, till
The Song, Part 2. Now that I had found the right version of my song, I wanted to find some recordings and sheet music for it. I first found a copy of the Pomona Men's Glee Club recording, and then went searching for the music and anything else I could find about the song. In my search, I had found a few small camping songbooks that had some versions under a few different names, like Cowboy Lullaby or Night Roundup Song, and finally found a reference to a book called 10,000 Goddamn Cattle by a woman named Katie Lee. The book seemed not only to have the sheet music, but also some of the history of the song in it. So I went in search of the book and in search of Katie Lee. Katie Lee turned out to be another fascinating person that I would find on my song Odyssey. Katie began her career in 1948 as a stage and screen actress. She had bit parts in a number of motion pictures and had parts in major NBC radio shows, including a recurring role as the niece on The Great Gildersleeve. In the 1950s, she left Hollywood to spend 10 years as a performer in coffeehouses and cabarets throughout the U.S., Canada, and Mexico, singing folk songs with her guitar. Katie had a great love for the outdoors and a special fondness for the Glen Canyon area. She had gone on many rafting trips down the Colorado into the Glen Canyon area and loved the beautiful canyons and the deep, clear pools. When the government decided to dam the river, it sparked Katie to become an environmental activist, protesting against the building of the dam. Despite her efforts, the dam was built, putting many of the places she had visited and come to love deep under the waters of the newly formed, man-made Lake Powell. But back to the song. I found that in addition to her book, Katie had an album that included her rendition of Roundup Lullaby. But again, I couldn't find a copy. So I did some searching and I looked up the record label, Katie Did Records. I found their phone number and I called it. There was a message machine, so I left a message, and then, 2 days later, who should call me back but 92-year-old Katie herself. We had a lovely conversation. She told me some stories about the song, told me stories about her life, both as a folk singer and as an activist. She was a very bright, shining lady. And she sent me a CD with her songs on it. In the end, I found about a half-dozen recordings of the song. Some old, some new, some with slightly different words, some played a little faster, some a little slower, but all of them giving a bit of that same feeling that I first felt so long ago, contemplating what it would be like out on the prairie, singing the cattle to sleep. Desert Silv'ry Blue. So, at journey's end, I find myself in familiar surroundings, at home, listening to my song. In the years since I first thought of trying to find out more about Desert Silv'ry Blue, I've come across lots of interesting information. I've met or read about a number of really interesting people, and have come to have a much greater appreciation for this simple little song. For me, it will always be a sound and a memory of my mom, soothing me to sleep, trying to get my frenetic little boy body to calm, to switch into sleep mode, to drift away. Warm or cold, rain or shine, night after night, a few simple songs sung quietly and softly. So here at Journey's End, I think I've finally realized what this song really means to me. And strangely enough, it has little to do with cowboys or poets or cattle or glee clubs. To me, what this song represents is love. Happy birthday, Mom.
Desert silvery blue beneath the pale still. So now the lightning's far away, the coyote's nothing scary, just singing to his dearie. Yay ho, I'm all a holiday. So settle down, ye cattle, till the morning. Nothing on the hazy plains that you folks need, nothing we can see to take your eye. Still we gotta watch you or you'll all stampede, stumbling down some royal bank to die. So now for still the shadows stay, the moon is slow and steady, the sun comes when it's ready. Yay ho, I'm on a holiday. So settle down, ye cattle, till the morning. Mostly it's a moonlit world the trail winds through, can't see much beyond our saddle horns. Always far ahead is misty silver blue, always underfoot is rocks and thorns. So now it must be this away, the dust that keeps you blinking, we're 7 miles from drinking. Yay ho, I'm on a holiday. So settle down, ye cattle, till the morning. So now the lightning's far away, the coyote's nothing scary, just singing to his dear.